Board of Education. Thank you. Let the record show that all members are present. You will notice the first thing on the agenda is that we're going to go into executive session. So that will last a little bit, and that was published, so hopefully everybody was aware of that. But we won't be starting our business meeting right away. So do I have a motion to go into executive session for discussion of pending litigation pursuant to KRS 61.1801C?
So moved.
I have a second. Okay, we have a motion by Mr. Wilson, a second by Ms. Bradley. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? All right, we will adjourn for executive session. Do we have a motion to return from executive session? Second. Second. We have a motion by Ms. Bradley, a second by Ms. Richardson to return from executive session. All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next thing on the agenda is an instructional equity update. Mr. Asher.
Good evening, thank you. Just a couple items I want to review here, basically kind of picking up where Mr. Grimm left off, as well as kind of my entry point and some current events that are coming up right now that we've been working on. The first one is our Elliott Walks. This is a big mile marker, a checkpoint for us, so to speak, where we have been through all schools over the past. It took us about 3-week time period from late January to just last week to complete these. This is a good way for schools to measure their growth from the fall, the first walk that we do, to what we call spring, even though it's done in January, February. We refer to it as our spring, as well as their year-to-year growth along those lines. It's different in that we're last month we were looking at testing data, right? Different in that regard to where we are looking at the learning environment based on observations that are completed by a team of district staff that go in and look at these different areas, as you'll see there in the box on the right, the different environments present in a classroom. So again, a good mile marker, a good checkpoint for us to feed our continuous improvement process. The second thing I want to make sure that you're aware of is the field testing that is coming up. The box on the right there will illustrate what grade levels are taking part in this. So basically, students will take one test. So for example, if we were to say 5th grade, you can see a number of content areas listed there. One student will have to take just one of those assessments, and that will be assigned by the state, just random selection, I assume, that for them to do that field test. The purpose is because there are new standards in place, particularly in reading and math, to test those as they're coming into full implementation next year, also to practice the online format, which will be a lot of logistics involved in that, and certainly a practice round of that is needed. So that'll be coming up next week. And our schools we've staggered it among our schools on when that'll take place, just so that we can have the appropriate support in place, especially on that technology piece. The next piece is related to the CDIP, which I know Mr. Brim had covered with you all back in December. This one in particular under the domain, the area of support and services, when we talk about our equity work that we are doing. So one of the initiatives is to educate staff on what it means to be culturally responsive in meaningful ways, not just in namesake or in policy documents. So what I wanted to show here is just the work that we are doing. As you're well aware, we have proposals that you've approved thus far, and we have a couple more on the table for our work with Whatever It Takes consulting. And we just had our equity team meeting today. Mr. Wilson is a member of that team and joined us today, as you can see on 218. She will continue to work with our district level equity team over a series of months. This is just the beginning part of this document. I just kind of wanted to outline the upcoming couple of months. A big piece that you need to be aware of, as requested, is that cultural intelligence assessment, of which not only our equity team, but our principals, our district leadership, as well as you will be taking part in.
One of the things that I've learned is there's a pretty intensive process on the interpretation workshop. So as you'll see there in the bottom line, I've got April question mark of when that'll take place. Because essentially we wanted to separate that. We just talked through this afternoon. That will have to be a special called meeting. She said with a group of that size, it does not necessarily take 4 hours. Could probably reduce it to 2. And so I will need to follow up with you. I'll start just via email on trying to get a date to schedule that. So basically you're taking that assessment, and that is just individually. I will send out a link to everybody that participates. You'll take the assessment. You'll get your individual results immediately, I believe, and then you'll come back to see that cumulative data and basically the interpretation of that, what that means and how that informs our equity work moving forward. Do you have any questions on that piece in particular?
I do.
Sure.
So on the 16th, is this something we need to put on our calendars, or is this something we're going to, how are we going to take that?
The 16th means I will send an email with a link, essentially, that you'll follow, you'll set a password, that sort of thing, and do that on your own time. I'll have to set a cutoff for you so that you're prepared for that interpretation workshop.
And then on the 20th, is that going to be more of a group thing?
So
we get the results and talk as a group? Or?
We have a number of people that are taking it, upwards of 25, I think is our number right now. So the logistics of that are difficult. So we had talked about offering 2 separate ones for the groups that would contain principals, teachers, administrative staff.
But we will be in a room together and not just doing all this stuff online. To at least talk about.
We will be in a room with the
exception. Maybe not with the whole group, but with part of the group.
Correct. But what we talked about there is just that piece of when you all get together, it has to be a special called meeting. So that would be separate. There will be some members, myself included, as well as equity team members that will join you all.
Yeah, my point was just that we will be in a room.
Yes. Yeah, it's not all online.
Good.
No.
Good. Okay.
And she, Dr. Banks, will be leading that interpretation workshop. That's part of that proposal on the table for this month. That concludes the update I have. Are there any other questions about the first part I covered, about this work?
Again with Dr. Banks, I'm sorry. She's with us every step of the way, right?
That is correct.
So when we look at, okay. I just want to.
I know it's confusing, right?
Yeah, no,
I know.
I just wanted to make sure that she's with us every step.
Yep. It's confusing, and I've put this document together again. This is just half of the first page. Because there's 4 proposals essentially we've had with them, so just trying to line all that out, the logistics, the timeline. So this is the first part.
Before, and I'll probably ask it again, because
That's all right.
Make sure she's with us every step of the way.
That's all right. We had a very...
That was part of the contract, is that she was really going to be instrumental in
Exactly. Yeah. And we had a very productive meeting today. Really, it's trying to clarify what that work looks like, who's all involved in it, because we don't want just the equity team, just the board. We want a lot of people involved in that. And so today was structuring how that's going to work over the course of really a year and a half.
And maybe Ms. Wilson can tell us if he was there too. But so you're drawing other people in, and we're on that original plan, like from the community or
Correct.
in the district staff.
Part of that original action plan, I think we approved that, or excuse me, you all approved that back in December. Under responsible person or party, there's a number of different groups, levels of representation who are part of that. And that we did talk about that piece a lot today.
So you kind of filled in more detail with that today as you worked.
The action plan?
Next time we'll see that plan.
Yeah, I can bring that as part of, because
every time it's updated, we can just see how it's the updates.
the smallest update we did was just changing dates up to like notes we've put over here of things that
People assigned to it.
people assigned. There were a couple things we went back and looked at, like maybe that made sense at the time, but we need to revisit that activity. So it is.
Great.
Yep, I can bring that back next month.
Okay.
So if she's coming into town on April 20th,
Correct.
we need to be looking at dates.
As well as those question mark dates. So that's what I'll facilitate with you all, email you collectively to try to nail down a date.
When is the next time she will be here? For any reason, not just
3/9, March 9th
March 9th.
is our next team meeting.
And I just wanted to say thank you for the updates. I appreciate that when we ask you to do things and then we approve things and when we pay for things, when you come back to us and give us the updates and let us know how it's going, I really appreciate that.
Sure.
And I like that accountability. And the other thing is, on those walkthroughs, I had no idea what that involved, but a staff member kind of shared some of that documentation with all of the incredible things the kids you're looking for, and the kids are doing these things that just, it was astounding. So, kudos to all the teachers and staff members that can kind of get that entire list of things done. And the kids seem to be really doing well and responding, and the staff seems to be doing a great job, and really just a lot to celebrate in the classroom.
Very much so. Thank you.
So March 9th, we're off school, is that correct? Oh, no, that's the day the juniors take because that's the day we go on that.
Oh, yeah.
March 10th.
Okay, because, I guess if she was here, then if I emailed you and nobody else, no other board members were going, and I was able to,
Yeah.
we could always come to these
Sure.
meetings. Okay.
Sure. Anything else? All right, thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have presentation of prioritization of expenses by Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you. I sent a document to the board last Tuesday, and the breakdown was divided into 3 different sections. The first was to take all of our expenditures and to place those into one of 3 identified subsets. One was what are legally required. The next was what are supplemental expenditures, and the third was discretionary. I will say that this took a tremendous amount of time on behalf of the staff. The district staff actually had several questions, and were able to reach out to Mr. Chenoweth Grant to get some clarification. Just as an example, I think we would all assume that transportation would be a legally required expense, but it's not. And so that fell into the supplemental category. And so that is just one example of things that we had to go through and identify all of the expenditures in our budget to try to place them into those 3 different subsets. Section 2 was the requested prioritizations and the rationales, which included I think a recommendation. And then Section 3 broke out the discretionary expenditures as a separate subset on those particular pages. So my recommendation involves returning $600,000 that was restricted from FY19 to the general fund, to return $600,000 from FY20 to the general fund, to return the $350,000 that was restricted in October of this year, which is part of FY20, to the contingency fund, and that was based on board action in November to take those funds from the contingency, and then to return $950,000 from FY21. And again, that is next year's budget. That was part of what Ms. Smith presented in the budget presentation in January, to return the full $950,000 to the general fund. What this does, it returns $2,150,000 to the general fund, which would eliminate the deficit from the current year, FY20, and also eliminate the deficit for FY21. It also restores the contingency fund to the original FY20 balance. So what action would be needed for this recommendation? The first, the BG1 that was passed in 2019 would need to either be rescinded or revised so that the cash that was included in that does not include the general fund restriction of the $600,000 from FY19. Because that was part of that original BG1, that $600,000, there would need to be action taken on the BG1. The second thing, it would take board action to unrestrict the $600,000 from FY20. And it would take board action to unrestrict the $350,000 from FY20 and restore that to our contingency fund. So that is my recommendation based on the information that has been provided.
I'm going to make sure I understand page 7. Alternate option if recommendation 1 is not selected. Are these in order of cuts, like how these are listed on page 7 through 9, or is that the priority order?
I think we listed potential cuts up to $300,000.
And these are in order. Like, is this your first recommendation? If we needed to cut 25,000,
Yes.
this is the first thing on the list.
Yes.
So these are all in order.
No, no. The only thing that's in order are the $300,000. Everything else is alphabetical.
Okay. Right.
I just had a quick question. So, in reviewing this document, it appears that if we simply unrestrict the money that we set aside for this new high school, that would address the deficits and the future deficits?
That is correct.
Okay, so we would have to have essentially, instead of cutting from that 5-page list of programs, current programs and current staff that we have currently available to our students, that we would leave all of those whole, and that the cuts we would make would simply be to restore the restricted funds back to the general fund so that we are not operating in a deficit situation.
That is correct.
So, Mr. Hawkins, if we did do this, let's say we unrestricted it, would you recommend a 4% tax revenue increase this year?
I think we would have to look at what our year end is and look at any potential expenditures that may be required through the state budget. And I think we would also have to look at if we want to consider staff raises. So there are several factors that would play into a recommendation, but we would be in a much better financial position. We would be back whole, so to speak, by unrestricting the funds and putting our budget back into the position where we were a couple of years ago.
Okay.
If I'm correct, on the January 21st meeting, Ms. Smith did in fact say that our budget was predicated on us having to take the full 4% increase for for several years, even if we did unrestrict all of the money. And that statement was made in the January 21st meeting, and then again in the January 27th meeting. Has that changed?
I would have to go back and look at the video because I thought her statement that we would need to take the 4% was predicated on the fact that we still had those funds restricted. I don't recall that question being asked of Ms. Smith, that if the funds were unrestricted, that would we need to take the 4%.
Okay.
And I also think I remember a couple of times, correct me if no one else remembers this, but you also stated that we would have to take the 4% in future years as well. Is that correct? You have said that in several.
I have said that if we continue to have restricted general fund dollars, yes.
I was under the impression you meant if we unrestricted those funds, so you don't.
I don't believe I made that statement.
You don't think that we would have to if we.
I'm saying the board would be able to consider a lot of different factors at that point in time. Again, not knowing what the state budget may send our way, not knowing what we may want to do with staff raises. So I think the board would have those things to consider as they move forward in terms of setting a tax rate.
Have we been able to give our staff a substantial raise, taking the 4% in the past?
Yes.
In the time that you've been here?
Yes.
A substantial amount being?
We've made salary scale adjustments, I think, on 6 or 7 different occasions during the time that I've been here as a superintendent.
So obviously, if we unrestrict everything, we're back to square zero with a high school. So if this is your recommendation, can you have ready for us next week? And I think it's part of our CDIP, so maybe we could have a presentation, because it is the 4th leg of our CDIP, I believe, was staff generated 2 years ago after the nickel path failed. Could you prepare for the board what your recommendation is?
I can give that to you right now.
Okay, please do.
Actually, I think my recommendation to the board, if we unrestrict the funds and we make ourselves whole again, is to put a hold on things and to engage our community. Because after the nickel did not pass in 2018, we actually had a work session as a board to talk about having a town forum to engage our community and hear what they had to say, to ask for their suggestions, to ask for their input and their thoughts before we move forward. And I would suggest that we do that again. And it would be...
We're doing that March 3rd.
And it would be more than one forum.
Sure.
I think it would take multiple opportunities to really engage our community, to hear from them. Because I think it's important. When the tax was not voted in a positive manner in June of 2018, I think we were all disappointed at that point in time. And I think when we began to make plans for that town forum, and I can vividly remember the work session that we did where we were planning that, and we felt that it was too soon in that fall. And so now I think it's time to revisit that. I think it's time to really sit down with our community, to take a pause and to say, what do you all believe? What do you all think we need to do moving forward? What's our best path forward as a school district? Because I think our community may have ideas that we're not aware of. And so I think it's time for us to be able to do that.
Okay.
I don't think it's going to be a one-time only. And I think that's the thing that we have to, because not everybody may be able to be there on March 3rd.
Well,
And so I think we need to have multiple opportunities, just as we did before when we have multiple forums to discuss the nickel tax. I think we need to look at options for our community to come and speak with us, that they can ask questions, that we can provide information, that they can share ideas. And then I think once that's done, then I think the board can sit down and really look at all of those options and develop a thoughtful plan forward.
So your recommendation to the board, and I'm happy to hear it, is to hear from the community.
It's to, first of all, it's to unrestrict the funds and make us whole, and then to move forward.
Can you
Anybody
talk
else?
a little bit about the decision not to take the 4% and how that has affected the school's income in the 2 years leading up to the nickel?
Obviously, anytime you leave money on the table, it can have an impact, and we have seen some of that. However, I do think the board was very conscious in their decision in terms of holding those rates flat for those 2 years leading into the nickel. As a matter of fact, after just probably not more than 2 to 3 weeks after we voted in 2017 to keep the rate flat, we had our first forum about the nickel tax. And so I think it was very conscious to try to hold that rate at a certain level, knowing that the nickel was a possibility, and that's a big ask when you ask for a nickel tax.
Yeah, and those 2 years compounded to present is $1.08 million
A year.
in lost revenue, which is also very near the amount of the deficit that you're projecting.
Right. I think, though, we have to also look at the fact that we've restricted 1.2 million over the last 2 years. In addition, 1.5 million because of the 350,000 from this year. So we've restricted, and we've added some really big expenses during that time frame as well. That's when we added the summer reading program. That's about $200,000 a year. We added SROs. That's about $300,000 a year. So we've added $500,000 in some big expenses that I think we are all very much in agreement that those were the right thing to do. But that does impact it as well. So, again, did we leave money on the table? We did. Anytime you don't take the maximum 4%, that's funds that you won't have not only that year, but for years moving forward.
At
And
a
if I could just
4%,
add, I think-
at a 4% revenue increase. So it really compounds every time you don't take it.
Well, and if I
It-
could-
Yes.
And also, let me just ask this, Sherry, first. Do you think it is a bad, I appreciate it, and as a member of the public, I think I would appreciate it. I like to see it from my other local government. What we spend our money on laid out like this. It's been a hard thing to accomplish, but I think we should all, I think we should know this. I mean, this is what we're spending millions, tens of millions of dollars on a year. So I think do you think that's a good exercise to educate the public?
I think anytime you can go through and look at your expenditures, and let me say this.
I mean, it can be threatening to people, but it's a good exercise.
Here's the thing, though, that it's done, and our staff has spent countless hours. I'm very proud of what's on that sheet. And I think I'm extremely proud of what we've been able to do and the opportunities that we provide our students. Because I would dare say you would be hard-pressed to go to any other district in Kentucky and find the level of support and opportunity that we have for our students and our staff.
And I agree completely, but I just think this is a great exercise. It's not something, it's threatening to look at expenses. I understand that totally. I understand that. But we should never be afraid to lay it out like you have here, to show what we do, but also what it costs. And we should never be afraid of that, even though it can be a scary proposition. Do you think then, other than unrestricting the money and then these, that there is nowhere, so our general fund budget's $20 million, is that correct?
It's approximately $30 million.
About $30 million. And in a $30 million budget, other than unrestricting the money, then we have about $300,000, so about 1%. Am I doing
Yeah,
that?
and if you wanted me to look,
Yeah,
if you wanted me to look
1%
further,
we take out.
if you wanted me to look further at any other areas to reduce, I certainly would feel like it's best to sit down and talk with staff and the community and
And I
say,
think that's what we anticipated.
here's what we spend our money on.
Right, and I think that, and my personal opinion is, if it comes, I know the nickel is definitely something people talk about. I've certainly been encouraged by the public. If I've had any public input, it's raise the nickel. That's what your mind's doing. You haven't brought that to us yet. If you do, I will certainly have an open mind, just like I did when you brought it in this 2017. But I do honestly feel that if we ever are going to go out and do that kind of tax increase again, that we have to show that we've had a good faith effort to look at our expenses, to justify them, to cut things that could be cut. Because when you have $30 million budget, it's hard to imagine that, and I know, again, that it's threatening. I know it's been very divisive in the community, but we're taxpayer-based. I mean, we need to show that we're being, that we're at least aware and looking at our expenses. So thank you for this. Anybody else?
Yes.
Oh,
if I
Sherry,
could
I'm
just
sorry.
speak, please. First of all, I want to say that the board sets the tax rates. Mr. Hawkins does not do that. And when we kept the rate flat, that was a 5-0 vote by a former board. And I don't think we can go back and second guess those decisions, but also that was part of a larger plan. At that point, the board had a short-term plan and a long-term plan that we were pursuing step by step by step. We knew the consequences, we knew the costs, we discussed the pros and the cons, and we involved the community on multiple occasions. So I don't think that really for us to go back and then say, well, what if we had done this? What if we had done that? What if the vote had passed? Is really helpful in any way. The second thing I want to say is that we did not run a deficit budget until we restricted this money. So we took this money out of our general fund and we put it aside for this high school. The first year we did that, we ran almost $1 million deficit budget. For this fiscal year, it's set to compound and we're set to run over $1 million deficit should we leave that money set aside for the high school. And then thirdly, for the fiscal year next year, should we leave that set aside and restricted, our budget forecast showed that we would be running about $1.7, $1.8 million deficit. What I guess I want to say is we don't have to cut our current programs. We don't have to cut our current staff. We don't have to reduce the level of services we provide to our students. All we need to do is put the money that we got from taxpayers and from the state back into our general fund, and then we're whole. We actually, I think, would have a little bit of a cushion so that we could, in fact, look at raises. Because I believe that raises and students should be our priority, not a building. And the last thing that I just want to say about this is, if you look in the back, we have students here with signs. And I just want you to know that.
Thank you, Sherry. Anyone else?
The recommendation you made is probably 50% of it, because that is an option. If the board chooses to unrestrict, then that would take care of the problem. But if the board chooses not to unrestrict, what are your recommendations then?
My recommendation would be, first of all, I need to know what level of cuts do you want me to make? And then to go beyond the $300,000 that our staff put together, I think that would take some serious conversations with our staff, with our administrators, and with our community to determine that. And so that would be my suggestion if the recommendation is not followed.
If the recommendation is not followed, do you believe that's your responsibility to advise the board on what cuts to make, what budget revisions to make?
I think I can bring you a list. And again, I think the board ultimately has to make the decision. I think it would need to be based on feedback and data, and that's what I would try to do, is to get feedback and compile that into data to try to prioritize the best I can, because one person's lens is not enough when you're talking about something this significant.
And I would just say that if we're going to pursue...
Were you done, Mr. Wilson? No.
Oh, if we're going to pursue... Oh, I'm sorry, were you not done?
No.
No, it's not. Do you think it would be helpful for the community to understand before the town forum what the possibilities are? What's the real consequences of not unrestricting these funds?
I don't know that I could put that together before March 3rd. When I asked for time before, I'd asked for about 3 weeks, and I was given 5 days. And so we have put together, I think, our best effort at this point in time, but it would take far more than a couple of weeks for me to get the input and the feedback from the staff and the administrators and the community in order to meet that timeline.
But do you believe the town forum would serve the community better if they understood what the consequences would be if we did not unrestrict the funds? That's my question.
I think that information would be helpful, but I also then believe that the town forum could then focus on just hearing from the community about ideas. We could still share with them options we could still share with them information. But in terms of the detailed, prioritized list of cuts, I don't know that that's feasible by that point in time.
All right. Back to my question then. Do you believe that would be helpful for the community to understand?
I think the community can look at the list right now and see what's being considered. And I think then they can make their own opinion about what they believe would be important and what they believe could be eliminated from the budget. But again, for one person or a small group of people, my staff, to make that list with that significant a level, I don't think number one, that would be the right way to go about it. And so I understand what you're asking. Would it be helpful? Again, I think the community has the list, and I think they can see these are all of our expenditures. This is what is on the table, so to speak, to be reduced.
Since we both agree that it would be best if the community had a very clear understanding of how this would impact programs and staff, would it be better to postpone or delay the town forum until you have an opportunity to do your due diligence?
I don't think so.
Why not?
Because I think the community has wanted this town forum, this town hall, since September, when it was first discussed. And I think we owe it to them to hear from them. And I think if we don't have the finalized list at that point in time, we can still share it with them and say these are all the things that could be considered for budget reductions. However, we want to hear from you. We want to try to provide as much information as we can and answer your questions as best we can. But maybe you have ideas that we haven't considered, and that's an opportunity for that to be shared as well. So I don't think postponing, and again, my thought was we would need multiple forums anyway. So if a second forum or a third forum was scheduled and we took our time to develop the list, I think in the proper way, then that information could be shared at that point in time.
Your idea of engaging the community and taking a pause, what are the timelines on this pause? How long do you envision? You've thought about it because you brought it up. What would be, we're talking about a 2-year pause, a 5-year pause?
I can't answer that. I think it really depends on the information and the feedback that we get. Because then I think the board, once we get through the process of listening to the community, I think at that point in time, the board then has to sit down and analyze the information and determine what are the next steps forward.
But my question is, how long do you think that community engagement will take until the board is?
I think, again, that's up to the board really to determine when you would be satisfied that we've gotten the information back that we feel is important for us to be able to determine next steps.
To Sherry's point about looking backward, I agree it's not good to look backward, but I think often there are lessons in looking backward. And when we didn't raise those 2 years, maybe I missed the meeting, that was not a plan that I ever remember being set forth. Like, we won't raise it for 2 years and then we'll take the nickel. Maybe in 17 it came up, not in 16. And not raising, I think it's important, and I hope we can lay this out very clearly at the public forum, and I will help to try to do that. We often look when we say, oh, we're not going to take the 4% revenue tax rate increase, what that's going to do to our tax rates. We have not looked what it does to our revenue. And that revenue, when we lose that revenue, that's from now until there's a new funding system. And it's cumulative of whatever the rate is, the 4% revenue increase every year. I would say because we get no matching funds now, because there's no help from the state with a nickel, like we used to at least get something, that's gone. another option, and maybe we can lay this out at the forum, is what we've kind of done, and maybe not in a really organized way, but you build your own nickel. And you raise that 4%, then you get the cumulative on it every year, and you build a school like that without risking a recall.
Right, and I would, if the board would, again, believe that would be a viable option, my recommendation on that would be to do it at the end of a fiscal year to determine where you're at, so you know what could be restricted at that point in time. Because doing it on the front end could very easily get us back into the situation that we're in right now. And so if the board chooses to take the 4% with the hopes of setting aside some dollars, my recommendation would be to do that at the close of the fiscal year as opposed to at the beginning.
And that's what we did do in 18. In 18, after we lost the tax fight, our budget for 18, for the 18, so the tax was in 18, right? Was that the fight?
The money was restricted in September. What I'm talking about is if you want to look at that, do that in June.
Well,
do it at the close of the fiscal year so you can see if there is a surplus, and that way then dollars could be set aside.
Well, I think there's two problems. But first of all, I think with 18, and again, I don't want to look back, but I think it is important to know the history, because I think we're very divided because everybody's all right or all wrong. So I think it's important to realize that year when we went for the tax, obviously had we won, we would not have gotten a 4% for our general operating, because our total increase would have been the nickel, which would have been capital outlay. So consequently, our budget did not include any revenues beyond the 4% revenue, right? We all agree to that. We had a budget based on a flat tax rate. We had a budget based on a flat tax rate for that year. We lost the tax fight. We learned we were going to be required to take the 4%. We're still getting heckled about it. And there were members, I believe Mr. Wilson was one of them, Ms. Cleveland, who did not want, they wanted to hire a lawyer and fight that, to not even get that money in our pot. Then that was about 300 of that 600. So, so we did do it at the end of that year. We said, well, no, we're forced to take it, even if we said we weren't going to, but we're going to restrict.
No, because the tax rate was set in August.
Right.
The board voted to restrict the funds in September.
But the tax
What
rate,
I'm saying is that if you set the tax rate in August or September, go through that fiscal year, and then in June, if you have a surplus, then you could look at restricting some dollars then, as opposed to doing it on the front end.
well, and I'm just making the point that half of that 600,000 was basically restricted because we never budgeted for it, because promises had been made to the community that we could not keep legally. And so we said, okay, well, we have to take it. Let's at least restrict it for a high school. I think the second problem that I've really learned in the last year is we can have all the intention of building our... When we went for the nickel, the benefits of a nickel were, it just took care of it right then. You could get it all. Secondly, there was some matching funds, which we've said are gone. Those are gone. The third thing, which I never paid much attention to, was it has to be used for building. It can't be used for anything else. And in the last year, I've realized that even the money that everybody voted to restrict, once it's there, we can't live without it. So I think it is important, it's like once that dime's laying there, we're going under without it. Even if we voted not to even have the dime in the first place, or even if we wanted to hire a lawyer to not have that dime, once it's there, we're going under if we don't have it. So I think that the nickel, I never appreciated that benefit of the nickel until this last year, but I do think there's other ways besides a nickel, or restricting everything, or waiting for your bonding, and I'm hoping at the forum, and I'm sure they will, the architect can show us the historical increase in construction costs compared to if we just let our bonding grow organically, and they're not going to meet. So all those things will be important. But I do understand Mr. Wilson's point that But, we've been kind of trying to work through this expense thing for November. I'm not sure I'd be inclined to postpone that, but that's me.
And then I just had a couple things. One thing is, I think anytime you talk about taking general fund money to build a school, what you're talking about is you're taking money out of the classroom, away from the teacher and away from the students. So I don't think that's a great idea. And I also know that no other district in Kentucky has built a school that way. The second thing is, just to be clear, the board decides what cuts to make. Mr. Hawkins doesn't get to decide. So the board makes that decision. So what I would recommend is we follow his recommendation first off, because then we're not making any cuts to teachers, classroom staff, or current programs. And number two, that the board go ahead and set up a process of how and when we are going to make the budgetary decisions for the fiscal year 2021. I think it's imperative we do that immediately.
I think we have until May, until our next budget.
I don't think.
And I think we should really be thoughtful about looking at what we're spending our money on. And even outside of the restricting the money, I don't understand the hesitancy or fear. I understand fear, but I do think as a public body, depends on taxpayer money, that looking closely at our expenses, that estimating them, and just showing people what we're spending it on. When I knocked on doors, I got this for a nickel. I got the answer, you just want more and more and more money, what do you even spend it on? And so if we're going to be afraid to go through the exercise of looking at this, or it's just the mere thought of it is heresy, then I don't know if we go for another nickel if we're going to have we're not going to be able to answer that. So I think this is a great start. Very much appreciate it. And
I would say this, if budget cuts are coming, if that's a direction, we can't wait until May. And the reason I say that,
requirements in April.
well, we have that, but I also think if that's going to impact our schools, they need time to prepare and plan as well. And so I think sooner rather than later, as far as that goes.
Right, and there's so many moving parts, obviously. We've learned that we got $170,000 more in distilled spirits than were in our budget. I had a luncheon with our lobbyists for KSBA. Some interesting things are happening there in the state. Who knows? That's always, but a lot of these things will become more clear even in March because the session ends in April. So there's a lot of moving parts going on right now. But I think it is important for the public to know how we spend our money, and this will be a good document to give them when they ask.
Sure.
Any more questions? All right. Okay. Now we'll go into our we have the graduation date. Mr. Hawkins, that's on our regular agenda for tonight. I know you have some more information. Will you give us an update?
Sure. Last week, I was able to talk with several officials from the Kentucky Horse Park, and because of the communication issue, they have been agreeable to allowing a fourth graduation on Saturday. So I have reached out to the Anderson County Superintendent. Franklin County is not able to adjust their times because they had already sent out invitations. But in speaking with the Anderson County Superintendent, she seemed agreeable that they would go at 11:30 and we would have a 9 o'clock graduation on Saturday morning. And so I know that's a little early.
I see a mother going, yay,
but it's only 1 hour earlier than last year. But I do think that is a very doable situation. I have spoken with Mr. Arnold, but again, I think at this point I think the board has to determine who's going to make the decision, but that is I think, a very good option that we would be able to graduate at the horse park at 9 o'clock on Saturday, May 23rd.
I want to thank you for doing that. I want to thank the parents for really brought this to everybody's attention and made sure your day was going to be as good as it can be. It's difficult to do this, but I think everybody worked together. I don't really know. This was an action item of whether or not we were going to take over that decision. So I guess we'll proceed if anybody has a motion that the board would decide, or
Do we need to do that?
if we don't have a motion, then it's,
I mean, I'm sorry, Mr. Hawkins, do we need to have an action item, or because that's agreeable to everyone?
What I would prefer is that the board determine who's going to make the decision.
Okay.
Because if we run into this again next year, are we going to be in the same boat? And so if we want to leave it with the school, then let's leave it with the school. And I mean, that's how it's been, I know, since I've been here. Or if the board wants to take that on, we can do that too. So
I mean, it's really not, is it memorialized anywhere? It's not a site-based matter. It's not,
it has just been traditional
It's just been
that the school has worked to set the date for graduation based on the end date. But for the last 2 years, we have tried to stay on the Memorial Day weekend, and because we work with 3 other schools in terms of utilizing that time frame to use the horse park, and it helps reduce costs for all schools involved.
and so I'm thinking, because it's not like a policy or it's not a site-based issue, it's just tradition. Are you looking that we memorialize it into something where it is with the schools, or just leave it where it's just tradition? You know, I mean, where we actually have some kind of,
I think
that
just some,
says that
I think just some direction that if you want the school
but
to
you're
make.
not looking for any kind of, you know what I mean? Like any kind of policy, any kind of structured thing?
Not
Okay,
a
that's what
policy.
I want to know.
I mean, I think
Okay.
if the board says we want the school to make the decision, then that's what we'll do.
And that'll be for this year without it being a policy or something.
It'll just remain in
Yeah, it'll just remain.
Until
Unless there's a change.
there's another issue.
Unless there's a change.
Okay, so, can we just table, we could just, is there a motion that the board make the decision to hold graduation? Or to, no, we're going to hold graduation. Is there a motion that the board make the decision on what day graduation will be?
So moved.
Is there a second?
No.
We'll just, okay, is there a second? Motion dies for lack of a second, so.
I move that we continue to allow the high school to set the date as it has been, and noting that this year was exceptional in lots of different ways, but that has worked, and if it's not broken,
I'll
So
second
that's
the
it.
motion.
I move that we let the high school
Okay,
decide.
all right. So I think we just had a motion that we, okay, fine. All right, any discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All opposed? Did you say nay? You said nay? Okay, so motion passes 4-1.
Debbie, I just
Did you
wanted
get that,
to,
Angel? Yes. Oh, I'm sorry.
I just wanted
For
to,
discussion. Yeah, go ahead.
well,
Go ahead, no,
so I just wanted to say thank you to the Anderson County Board and Superintendent, if you'll pass that along, and also to the
Yes.
horse park. And then also thank you to you and your staff, and the parents, and also students. We had communication from students that reached out to us. And so I just wanted to thank everybody, and hopefully, now that we're back on Saturday, everything
Yeah.
will be beautiful and wonderful. So good weather.
We all have up and early, and you'll have a long time for parties before project graduation. Perfect, perfect. Okay. Now we'll go to our review the board agenda, Mr. Hawkins.
Thank you, Ms. Evelyn. Just a reminder, we will recognize our 3 students who first, second, and third place finishers in the district spelling bee next week. So if we look at the consent agenda, First item there are donation requests. Oh, do we need to have Amy do the financial?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. That was my first item here, and I thought we haven't done that yet, so I think I turned that microphone off.
They're very hopeful.
I turned it off. It's on top.
We good? Okay, so the financial summary of our cash balances by fund for January 31st, 2020. Our general fund, we began with a little over $12 million. Our revenues for the month were 1.7, expenditures 2.4, and ended the month with 11.4 million in our general fund. Our special revenue fund, we began with 34,000. Our revenues were 202, expenditures 215,000, and ended the month with a little over 21,000. Our district activity funds, we began with 623,000. Our revenues for the month were 28,000, expenditures 64,000, and ended the month with 586,000. Within that fund is our one-to-one device insurance program. We began with 48,000. We only had $378 in additional revenues, $3,100 in expenditures, and ended the month with a little over 45,000. Our school activity fund, we began with 275,000. Our revenues for the month were 71,000, expenditures 59,000, and ended the month with 287,000. Our capital outlay fund, we had no activity, so we began and ended the month with 180,000. Our building fund, we began with 1.5 million. We did have one transfer to our debt service fund for a bond payment of 326,000, so we ended the month with 1.1 million. Our construction fund, we began with 1.1 million. We had $1,300 in SFCC interest. Our expenditures, 55,000, and ended the month with a little over 1.1 million. Our debt service, again, this is just where we are required to reflect our bond payment of the $326,000. Our food service fund, we began with 298,000. Our revenues were 196,000. Our expenditures were 177,000, and we ended the month with 318,000 in our food service fund. Our daycare fund, we began with 134,000. Our revenues were a little over 50,000, expenditures 42,000, and ended the month with 142,000. Our community ed fund, we began with a little over 33,000, had no revenues for the month of January, had $202 in expenditures, and again ended just a little over 33,000. For a grand total of 16.3 million beginning balance, revenues 2.6 million, expenditures 3.6 million, and ended the month with almost 3. Are there any questions?
Thank you, Amy.
All right, so we'll go through the consent agenda. You can see that the first item are our donations for the month. The vast majority of those are monetary, with the exception of a couple things. One in particular, I appreciate Mr. Wells. He's already collecting donations for our attendance March Madness event, and you can see those listed, but again, nothing out of the ordinary there. Fundraisers, just a very few this month. Several of those are service projects, and so would call your attention to those. Travel requests, again, not many. One of our teachers to attend a choral directors meeting, and then the rest are student trips, FCCLA for the state competition, high school academic team for the Governor's Cup, and middle school FFA students going to the Leadership Training Center in Hardinsburg. The next item, we have 2 hardship applications for your review, and we've reviewed those and would recommend your approval on those hardship applications. As Ryan alluded to earlier, we do have 2 contracts on the agenda this month, and I'll deal with number 2 first. Number 2 is for the assessment work that will be taking place in April. Again, we're we have those online assessments that everyone will take, and then the follow-up meetings with those. That's number 2. That's a contract with Whatever It Takes. And then the first one is for the training modules that will take place beginning next school year. So based on the information through the assessments, then modules are developed, and then that training will occur throughout next school year.
And what was this for, what contract?
It's that Whatever It Takes consulting for the equity work.
Okay.
Okay. The next item is a request to use our school buses. One is 4-H camp in the summer, and the Woodford County Reading Club, and that's also in the summer. Item G is the tuition schedule for next year, and that's just setting up the 4 payment dates that would occur during the 2021 school year. Item H, Mr. Wells leads this work. He convenes a committee each year to look at our code of conduct and to look at any revisions or recommendations for changes. And so you have those recommended changes for your consideration and approval. The next item is to approve the assurance certifications for our family resource centers. This is done each time that we get a contract with the state for our family resource centers, so we would ask for you to approve that. And then just a few days ago, we got our first and second CATS offers of assistance for the year. Any questions on anything related to the consent agenda? All right, if we look at the regular agenda, you'll see that first item is the notification of personnel matters, and that's everything that's taken place since our last board meeting. Item B is to accept the notification of payment of bills. Item C would be the approval of meeting minutes. There are 3, January 21st, the 5 o'clock meeting on January 27th, and the 6 o'clock meeting on January 27th. All board members were in attendance, so we can approve those as one motion. Item D, we are at the end of our 3-year contract on copiers, and so Mr. Gibson has solicited those bids and has reviewed those, and we have a recommendation that we would award that contract, or the bid, I'm sorry, to Toshiba. That is a 3-year agreement, and that would begin July 1 of 2020. So we're asking for you to approve the bid. He is working with Chenoweth Law Office on the contract that would need to be signed. That also has to go to KDE because of the amount of the contract that it is over a 3-year period. Item E is the BG4, and this is the first of 2 closeout documents on our security window glass project that was completed over the summer. Item F and G, I would really direct any questions here to Mr. Locke. This was something that I think he sent an email to some board members as well as to me and Amy requesting some kind of direction and on these 2 items. The first is the early site package for the new high school, and the second one there is the phase 1 scope of design development. So I'm not sure what questions the board may have related to that.
Can you just kind of tell us, Kevin, or Jenny, or you guys know what you want to talk about this?
Yeah, the first item was whether or not we were talking with Trace Creek about what would be an appropriate time to start, and based on the weather for the new high school for construction to start. And so that was the issue in the email, talking about during the site package where some underground utility work would be done, some grading work would be done during the summer when the weather is good. So that was the emphasis for that first item F. Item G was talking about what the package would be for the high school and what alternates could be put place in construction documents so that there would be flexibility that boards have come midday. And item H, I think, just to keep rolling on, that was trying to clarify a little the upcoming community forum, those suggestions in there, as to what we were proposing to do in the confirmation.
So these are listed as action items. Okay,
To be voted on next week.
to be voted on next week. All right. Does anyone have any questions about F or G? And then we can talk about H.
I do.
Okay.
I just have a suggestion. I believe and would request now that we add an action item for next week. I guess it would be item J. And the action item would be that we take no additional work, that no additional work would take place on the new high school until the 2021 budgetary decisions are made by this board.
Any documentation that you want to have?
Yeah, that's simply the motion. I just wanted to make it now so that the public could be aware and have adequate notice. And also,
Just send it to me somehow. Okay, exactly how you want it written, if you don't mind. It's easier for us to keep track of that. Mr. Hawkins, correct? If we get them by
That's fine.
email.
Sure.
All right. The role in the public forum, I do anticipate the drawings being up. I know that one of the options that I hear about, I think I might have heard it at this table a little bit too, is why are we just, and I think we heard it from a lot of people that came to the meeting on the 27th, why are we just completely dismissing the idea of a renovation? I think you might have had a few ideas on that. That wouldn't take a lot of work if you want to show that. Yeah,
That it would take a lot of work.
it would not.
We can do a cursory review.
Oh, I'm sorry.
of what it would take to show what a renovation, it would not be in detail.
His
Right.
presentation wouldn't take a lot of work. I thought you were implying the renovation.
Oh, no.
Wouldn't take a lot.
No.
Okay.
His presentation. And then again, kind of what I mentioned, I think you and Trace Creek know the most about construction costs and historical, and because you work in this all the time. So I would hope that we would have some kind of, or we can call on you to prepare some type of idea of what construction costs, what rate they're growing at. Does anybody else have anything or thoughts about Kevin's role in the, and costs, obviously, cost of these things.
One of the questions that I had was whether or not we were going to be showing the plans for the high school as part of this community forum.
I think that's been what we've discussed.
Yeah, I think so. I think they definitely need to be up, and I don't, and you maybe talked about it a little bit. Brian did a great job talking about them at a board meeting once. So, I don't think it needs to be extensive, but yes, I think so. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. Anything else that we need to tell Kevin that he needs to get done? All right. I don't really know that that's an action item. Is this just kind of a discussion about this? So unless there's somebody that is anticipating we're going to
Yeah, we can just take
vote
that
on their
off.
role
Yeah.
next week.
We can take that off. I mean, as far
Okay,
as the
okay.
role in the public.
Yeah, are you keeping track of what we're adding and taking off? Good.
I'm sure Angel is, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I want him in writing, Sherry. I'm not taking it. It's hard when she needs to get them down. So, all right, then, Mr. Hawkins?
Yes.
Are you good then, Kevin? Do you have any more questions for us? You good? Okay.
All right, item I is, would ask that the board authorize me to work with the Chenoweth Law Office to draft a long-term lease for the tennis courts for the use of the tennis courts at Falling Springs. I met with Rich Pictor a few weeks ago, and they are planning a complete removal, tear out, and put in new courts here at Falling Springs. We've been very fortunate that they've allowed us to use those courts really at no cost over the last number of years. They've actually done 3 repairs, renovation type things in the last probably 15 years, and they haven't asked us to contribute at all. And so I think this is a fair request. They are asking us to contribute $30,000 to an over $400,000 project. And so in order for us to do that, we have to do it through a lease agreement. And so I just would ask that you authorize me to work with Mr. Chenoweth to develop that lease agreement then that would allow us to contribute the requested amount in a lump sum payment so that would go toward those renovation of the tennis courts.
I just have one question, just kind of because of our experience with these types of agreements in the past. Is the contract going to specify our scheduling of that?
It does.
Okay, because
Yeah.
I know in the past, like, we've always felt like we kind of got shortchanged. We might add I don't know what
No, we
sport,
have
I don't know
exclusive.
what sport you would add to a tennis court, but we've added sports for the football field,
Right.
and then all of a sudden we can't use it for that, so.
Well, no, we have priority usage on the stadium for the time during our football and
But
soccer
this is-
seasons.
This is going to give us priority during.
And we have priority now on the tennis courts. It would continue that, and we would ensure that that is in the agreement.
Are they going to put lights up?
That is not part of this. If they get some other grants, that is a possibility, but right now, the lights are not included in this project.
So that contract will be ready next week? We'll get it in?
No, it's to authorize me to do it.
Okay,
So I would hopefully get it back to you in March.
okay.
And I would just say thank you to, all the partnerships. I think the partnerships with the community and the school are just phenomenal. And this really does highlight how much our community does for our students and our schools. So if you don't mind, just thanking them. And I appreciate you guys always thinking outside the box and being able to come up with solutions like this that work for everybody and really benefit everyone.
And I think everyone in the community would be happy to see new tennis courts because they are well used, used a lot, so. All right, then, do we have any old business? Discussion items, Raptor Security Program discussion.
Right. This is something we are piloting in, I guess we can go ahead and do it tonight if you want. Well, no, it's not on the agenda, so that's, we'll talk about that next week then. I'm sorry, that's on next week's agenda.
Do we have some,
It's just an update.
okay. All right. Any more discussion items?
Got these two here.
Yeah, which one? Oh, I see, I'm still on last.
Yeah,
next week.
yeah, that's.
Okay, I'm sorry, thank you. Volunteer recognitions, Ms. Springate.
Yes. In the past, we have, at the request of a former board member, Karen Brock, we had recognitions for community partnerships, and it always felt so good to recognize the community and the different churches and organizations and folks that really support our schools and allow us to provide excellent opportunities. And I know we've kind of had some discussion about that, but my thought was that we would authorize the superintendent to talk with the different schools about maybe doing some parent recognitions so that when we go into the schools starting next month, we would be able to have the schools kind of say, these are a few folks we'd like to recognize, or this is a group we'd like to recognize, so that we can have that kind of as a good news report, and also just to highlight all the work that our parents and grandparents and community really does, every day with our students. So my thought would be that we would just authorize Mr. Hawkins to have those discussions with the schools and to kind of come up with that so that we can celebrate our volunteers.
And I think Ambrose will probably know this. Years ago, there was always something called a WOW Award that went yearly to the parent volunteer. I mean, it wouldn't be that big, but I think it is something to do. It would be good to do it on a local level at the school. I think that's a great idea.
Thank you.
We could call it the Pride Award. That was another thing we talked about. So So do we need to do anything to?
I'll just
I
work
will
with the
just-
principals on
Does
how we
anybody
can
have
do
any other
that.
thoughts about this, or do they want anybody else involved in the selection,
Well, I
or,
know, I think
or what the criteria would be, or?
we kind of ran out of groups.
Well, I mean, we've gone through we've honored almost 40 groups, so
Could we start over?
we could.
I think we should start
Yeah.
over. I mean, so, yeah, they may have forgotten, it's been 3 years. All right, okay, so Ms. Bringut, are you going to work with Mr. Hawkins on that?
Yep.
Yeah, I feel like
I-
that's
with
all
just with the
direction I have.
principals,
Yeah,
sure.
I don't want to micromanage, I just want it to
Okay.
be something positive and not have unintended
Do
consequences,
we-
so I think they're best suited at this time.
And so, just to be specific, we're thinking about doing this when we go to the school for that meeting.
I would like to do that.
Yeah. So, good. So what times are set? All right, so where are we next month?
South side.
Okay. And then public forum discussion, my name is by that. I just feel like this is coming up on us. You know, we have several, we have a flyer that we approved that's gone out, I assume.
We haven't done the flyer because we're still working on the options. And again, I think that was
The
part,
options
the
were-
funding options.
Okay.
And so, because that's changed since September with the additional restriction. And so we are still trying to process through those. And again, I don't know if that's still the desire of the board to present those, or do you want to make it much more open-ended in terms of hearing from the community about that? I think we can certainly put those together as a starting point, but
Well, and I think, go ahead.
We voted to approve the flyer at the last meeting.
right. But the flyer says that funding options will be posted on our website. And so before we sent, I mean, we've advertised for the meeting or for the forum, but we just haven't sent the flyer out specifically because we had not done those, did not have those completed.
And I think there is updated information even on bonding for sure.
Right.
And I don't know if that was going to be part of
Yes.
that you were going to put on the website. I mean, word on the street, there's a big new formula that the state's come out with. So that is going to affect our bonding, is that correct?
I haven't seen that.
Nothing has been finalized.
Yeah, right. Again, not till March, but, yeah. Yeah, we could look at the proposed. It's quite a difference. Anyway, okay. But I think Kevin is going to be here. We have confirmed with right, Kevin? Or somebody from Ross Tarn will be here on March 3rd. And kind of talking about the things we talked about. We have confirmed with Hilliard Lyons that they will be here. They will only be presenting what our bonding potential is under different scenarios. They will not address what any different types of tax rates would bring. I do think, and I think it's if we have something that talks about the effect of doing different tax rates, it might be good. I don't know if you were working on that.
As far as,
The effect of, well,
yes,
we'll talk about it, yeah.
I'm happy to do anything
Okay.
like that to help.
So what are you waiting on, Scott? Okay, just on
Was it-
the funding options.
Yeah, well,
to
we're just finalizing those. And now, one of the funding options that we were going to include was the nickel. So,
Okay.
I mean, we would
Yeah.
need to know what the bonding would be on that as well, so.
Well, I know, and so maybe you can get with Kelly before that.
Right.
Okay, yeah, that should be pretty easy. Okay,
And just to clarify, would we want Amy, our finance officer, to work on the effects of the different tax rates, or would we want a board member to do that?
I think Amy,
Okay, okay, that
in
sounds
addition
good.
with, you know, if we have any other sources, so, yeah.
Thank you.
All right, well, we'll talk about it again next week and make sure that, is there anything else anybody wants to add on the public forum? All right, those were the two only discussion items listed on the agenda. Are there any other discussion items?
Yes, and I will email this to you, but I would like to add another action item for next week. I would like to add an action item where we set executive sessions at the end of our meetings instead of at the beginning, so that we can accommodate the public, and we wouldn't have those hour-long or hour-and-a-half-long meetings right when we open a meeting. We would do that at the end, like we've traditionally done.
So you want us to vote on a policy, or are you going to have a policy that's ready for us to vote on? Or-
It would be more of a procedure, I think, just that
Okay,
we
so
would
and you'll
hold
have
executive
that,
sessions at the end.
and you'll
I'll
have
email
that
it.
drafted, and can you send it so it can be attached?
I will email that to you, yes.
Okay, so it can be attached in time for everybody to review and read it.
Right, and I just brought it up tonight just so that people would know.
Okay, so then we'll know to
Yes,
look
I
for
want
it,
to
but yeah, if you could have the
open and
attachment.
transparent.
I'm hoping that we can have all the attachments so everybody can see everything, within a few days of the meeting. Anything else? Do you have anything you want to say, Sherry, just in general?
No, I feel like there's a lot of good news to celebrate, and I'm really looking forward to getting out into the schools and kind of seeing the students and the performances and, the parents and the teachers and the grandparents, and really celebrating some good news. And I also firmly believe we need to go ahead and make some budgetary decisions so that we can have, be able to have a plan and move forward. So I'm hopeful that we can come up with that.
Ms. Bradley?
I am very grateful that we had a happy resolution for graduation. I think that that is the best of all scenarios. I appreciate Mr. Hawkins and Anderson County's administrators being willing to work with us and getting that resolved. I know that makes for a lot of happy seniors and parents, so I appreciate the efforts on that.
Mr. Wilson?
I'm fine.
Ms. Richardson?
Just happy that the seniors got their Saturday
Yeah.
graduation date.
Yeah.
That's good, and that's about it, really.
I just want to say, I'm sorry, Ryan.
I also wanted to say thank you for your work with the graduation date. As well, I'd like to mention that this Saturday we will be hosting Dance Gold, which is a really good organization and opportunity that we donate to the pediatric cancer research at UK. And if you know any high school students, please encourage them to come. It's a really great time. It's a dance-a-thon. It's about 6 hours, and it's for a really good cause. And yeah, I'll keep you all updated next week about how that goes.
Okay, thank you, Ryan. I just want to say I spent the last 2 weekends at academic team. I was an official with Danny. Was there too at the district elementary academic team, and how fun that is. That is so fun. Those kids were so excited. And then Saturday I went to Woodford was lucky to host the regionals, which was good, and I was there for 6 hours because I'm such an academic team nerd. But they won. They came from behind with Dunbar, so we had a lot to be proud with those kids. And they also won the Sportsmanship Award, Woodford County did, so that was great. And then finally I want to say that Mr. Wilson and I attended the Unity Assembly on Friday afternoon at the high school. And they had a speaker there who was really good. I think he must be very popular because this is Ryan, the third year in a row they've invited him to come. Very energetic, had a good message for all our kids, and anything that is going to emphasize unity and is going to hear different voices is positive. And it was a very positive experience. So I think there's some fun things happening out there. That's all I've got. Do we have a
I move to adjourn.
second?
Second.
Motion to adjourn by Ms. Bradley, second by Ms. Richardson. All in favor say aye. All opposed?